The quantum transmission pierced through Earth's atmosphere at exactly 14:47 GMT, carrying with it the arrogant certainty of a species that had never known defeat. Fleet Admiral Zephyros of the hegemony of Seven Suns stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Dominion, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the warship's harsh lighting. Behind him, holographic displays showed the blue-green world that would soon bow before hegemony rule or be reduced to glowing ash. Zephyros had conquered 47 star systems in his 30-year career. Each victory followed the same pattern: overwhelming display of force, ultimatum, swift capitulation. The species varied, some scaled, some furred, some crystalline, but their responses remained predictably similar. Terror, then desperate negotiation, then surrender. The humans would be no different. His reconnaissance had been thorough. Earth's inhabitants were bipedal mammals, soft-skinned and fragile, lacking natural armor or redundant organ systems. Their technology barely qualified as spacefaring: chemical rockets, primitive nuclear weapons, no energy shields or faster-than-light communication. Most damning, their military tactics appeared simplistic: large formations, direct confrontation, overwhelming firepower. Exactly the kind of warfare the hegemony had perfected over millennia. "Begin transmission," Zephyros commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Throughout the solar system, his fleet's quantum communicators synchronized, ensuring every government, military installation, and civilian broadcast network on Earth would receive his message simultaneously. "Inhabitants of the third planet," he began, using the formal conquest protocol, "I am Fleet Admiral Zephyros of the hegemony of Seven Suns. Your world has been selected for integration into our dominion. You have precisely 24 of your local hours to surrender unconditionally. Comply, and your species will be granted the privilege of serving the hegemony. Resist, and you will face pacification protocols that have reduced proud civilizations to memory." Zephyros gestured to his tactical officer, who activated holographic displays showing the fleet's firepower. 150 warships hung in the void beyond Earth's moon, their weapons capable of glassing continents. "Do not mistake this for negotiation. This is notification. Your response will determine whether your children inherit servitude or ash." The transmission ended. Zephyros settled back in his command throne, already composing his report to the High Command. Another world, another victory. Perhaps this one would take 36 hours instead of 24. These mammals might have more pride than sense. 5,000 miles below, deep within Cheyenne Mountain, General Patricia Hayes watched the alien transmission with the cold calculation of a career soldier who had spent 40 years preparing for this exact moment. The strategic command bunker hummed with activity as officers coordinated with governments worldwide, but Hayes remained motionless, her weathered face betraying nothing of the fire burning in her chest. She had been 8 years old when the first UFO sightings gained government attention. 13, when the military began seriously considering extraterrestrial contact scenarios. 25, when she helped draft the initial alien invasion contingency plans. Now at 58, she commanded Operation Sovereign Shield, humanity's most classified defensive protocol. "General," her aide approached cautiously, "the President is requesting immediate consultation with the Joint Chiefs." Hayes nodded without taking her eyes from the tactical displays. 47 conquered worlds. The aliens had provided helpful intelligence about their methods during their arrogant little speech. Shock and awe, overwhelming force, direct confrontation. Everything humanity had learned not to do during 7 decades of asymmetric warfare. "Tell the President we'll give these bastards the same answer the 101st Airborne gave the Germans at Bastogne," Hayes said quietly. "Nuts." She turned to her operations staff. "Activate Sovereign Shield. All phases. Authorization Tango 77 Alpha." Across the globe, men and women who had spent their careers perfecting the art of invisible warfare received coded messages. In Virginia, Navy SEAL Team 6 concluded their training exercise and prepared for real deployment. In Hereford, The SAS suspended all operations and recalled personnel from around the world. In Kubinka, Spetsnaz operators received orders that made even hardened veterans pause. In Bragg, Delta Force commanders opened sealed packets they had hoped never to see. The clock was ticking, but humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first human learned to hide from predators in tall grass. The aliens wanted to see Earth's military capabilities. They were about to learn why humanity's greatest military achievement wasn't its technology. It was learning to make the enemy afraid of the dark. 24 hours later, Admiral Zephyros received Earth's response through official diplomatic channels, a single word in over 200 human languages, each translation equally defiant. He had expected as much. Pride came before pacification with every species. Deploy occupation forces to the major population centers, he ordered Subcommander Krex, his chief ground operations officer. Standard protocol. 5,000 troops per city, establishment of command posts, civilian suppression, infrastructure capture. This should be concluded within 48 hours. Krex, a veteran of 30 planetary pacifications, saluted crisply. His own exoskeleton bore the scars of rare close combat encounters. Species occasionally produced individual warriors brave enough to face hegemony troops directly. They died quickly, but they sometimes left marks. Deployment sectors, sir. New York, London, Moscow, Beijing, Tel Aviv, Sydney, Zephyros replied, consulting his intelligence reports. Major population and governmental centers. Once these fall, regional resistance will collapse. It was a proven formula. Control the cities, control the world. Krex descended to Earth with the confidence of a professional who had performed this same operation dozens of times. His landing craft touched down in Central Park as dawn broke over New York City, disgorging troops in powered armor that could stop anti-tank rounds. Energy weapons, force shields, aerial support drones. The hegemony's technological advantage was overwhelming. Within minutes, his forces had established a perimeter around the park and begun advancing toward the surrounding city blocks. Krex expected fleeing civilians, maybe token resistance from local military forces, then the gradual emergence of governmental representatives seeking terms. Instead, he found empty streets. The silence unnerved him more than he cared to admit. During the Proxima campaign, the insectoid defenders had at least chittered warnings at each other. The crystalline entities of Vega Prime had resonated with harmonic battle songs. Here, nothing. Just empty concrete and glass towers that reflected his troops' movements like watching eyes. Perimeter teams report no civilian contact, his communications officer announced. City appears evacuated. Krex frowned. Evacuation suggested preparation, which suggested the humans had taken his admiral's ultimatum seriously. That was unusual but not unprecedented. Some species try to hide their populations before surrendering. It never worked. The hegemony's sensors could detect life signs through most planetary matter. Begin infrastructure surveys, he commanded. Locate power generation, water treatment, communication hubs, standard occupation protocol. His words proved prophetic in ways he couldn't imagine. 3 miles beneath Central Park, in tunnels originally built for the city's subway system and expanded over decades of classified construction, Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison monitored alien communications through equipment that officially didn't exist. Morrison had been fighting in shadows for 22 years. Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, half a dozen conflicts that never made headlines. He understood patience, precision, and the psychology of fear better than any textbook could teach. The aliens were broadcasting in the clear, using standard military frequencies, completely confident in their technological superiority. They had no idea they were being watched by an enemy that had spent 70 years perfecting the art of invisible warfare. "Romeo team, what's your position?" Morrison whispered into his throat microphone, using a communication system that operated on principles the aliens wouldn't recognize. 600 meters north of their command post, came the reply from Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen. clear sight lines on their command structure. Preliminary count shows 47 personnel, standard rotation pattern. Morrison smiled grimly. 47 personnel in a command post meant the aliens were following doctrine designed for conventional warfare. They had established a central command structure, predictable patrol routes, and standard communication protocols. Everything SEAL training had taught him to exploit. Delta Team, in position beneath their forward observation post, replied Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez. They've got sensors pointed outward but nothing watching their six. Permission to begin Phase 1. Morrison checked his chronometer. The aliens had been on the ground for 6 hours, long enough to establish patterns, short enough that they hadn't yet adapted to local conditions. Perfect timing for what the SEALs called initial contact assessment, determining exactly how these invaders would react to pressure. All teams, execute Phase 1. Remember, we're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to teach them fear. In London, Captain James Stevens received Morrison's mission update through quantum-encrypted channels that connected every special operations unit on Earth. Stevens had spent 15 years with the SAS, including classified operations in territories that officially didn't exist on any map. He understood psychological warfare better than most people understood breathing. Unlike the Americans in New York, Stevens had chosen a different approach to the alien occupation. Where Morrison favored direct action from concealment, Stevens preferred to make the enemy question their own senses. His team had spent the previous 18 hours moving through London's ancient underground networks, not just the Tube, but Roman ruins, medieval crypts, Victorian sewers, and World War II bunkers that honeycombed the city's foundations. The aliens had established their command post on the Thames, in the shadow of Parliament. They obviously understood symbolic victory: control the seat of government, control the population. What they didn't understand was that London had been conquered before, and its people had learned lessons that went deeper than government buildings. Ghost 1 to Ghost Team, Stevens whispered into his radio. The call sign wasn't creative, but it was accurate. His unit specialized in being exactly where the enemy least expected, then vanishing before retaliation was possible. Ghost 2 ready, came the reply from Sergeant Major David Walsh, positioned in the sewer system directly beneath the alien command post. Ghost 3 ready, reported Captain Emma Foster from her sniper position in the ruins of an ancient church foundation. Ghost 4 ready, confirmed Sergeant Jack Morrison from his position in a World War II bunker that supposedly didn't exist on any current maps. Stevens checked his equipment one final time. Unlike traditional warfare, special operations required precision rather than firepower. His team carried suppressed weapons, electronic warfare equipment, and most importantly, detailed intelligence about alien technology gathered from intercepted communications and observed behavior patterns. Execute Phantom Protocol, Stevens commanded. Let's show these bastards why humans learn to hunt in the dark. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Colonel Alexei Volkov received the same operational update with the cold satisfaction of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for exactly this type of warfare. Spetsnaz doctrine emphasized psychological pressure, technological adaptation, and the ruthless exploitation of enemy weaknesses. The aliens had provided all three opportunities. Volkov's intelligence indicated that the hegemony forces were psychologically adapted to direct confrontation and technological superiority. Their species had evolved as apex predators on worlds where strength determined survival. They understood hierarchy, force projection, and intimidation. What they didn't understand was an enemy that refused to engage on their terms. Frost 1 to all Frost units, Volkov transmitted, using the winter warfare call signs that reflected both his unit's specialty and their current operational philosophy. Target priorities: communication equipment, supply lines, psychological pressure points. Remember, we're not fighting to win ground. We're fighting to win minds. His teams had positioned themselves throughout Moscow's industrial district, an area the aliens had largely ignored in favor of governmental and population centers. another tactical error that demonstrated their unfamiliarity with human military thinking. Volkov understood that battles were won in the mind before they were won on the ground. Back in New York, Morrison's teams executed the opening moves of what would become known as the Central Park Massacre, though no bodies would ever be found. Chen's Romeo team waited until an alien patrol passed beneath a subway grating, then used directed electromagnetic pulses to disable their communication equipment. When the patrol stopped to investigate the malfunction, Delta team emerged from storm drains with suppressed weapons and precision timing. 30 seconds later, 4 alien soldiers had vanished without a trace. Their equipment remained, but the soldiers themselves had been extracted through tunnels that connected to a transportation network spanning the entire city. The aliens' powered armor was impressive, but it meant nothing when the enemy could strike and withdraw before retaliation was possible. Morrison monitored alien communications as confusion spread through their ranks. Their language was incomprehensible, but their tone was universal: uncertainty, growing concern, the first whispers of fear. Exactly what SEAL doctrine predicted when an enemy encountered an invisible adversary. "Romeo team, excellent work," Morrison transmitted. "Continue harassment protocol. I want them to understand that standing still is as dangerous as moving." In London, Stevens' Ghost team demonstrated why the SAS had earned its reputation during decades of counter-terrorism operations. Foster's sniper position allowed her to observe alien patrol patterns, while Walsh's position in the sewers gave him access to every building the aliens occupied. When an alien technical team attempted to establish communication relay equipment on Westminster Bridge, they discovered that humans had learned to attack infrastructure in ways that seemed like equipment failure rather than enemy action. The communication relay simply stopped working. Then their backup equipment failed. Then their portable generators lost power. Each failure appeared mechanical, random, the kind of problems that complex technology experienced in unfamiliar environments. The aliens spent hours troubleshooting problems that Stevens' team had created with surgical precision. "Ghost Team, Phase 2, Stevens commanded. "Let's show them how we learn to hunt predators." Volkov's approach in Moscow reflected the brutal efficiency that had made Spetsnaz legendary among special operations forces worldwide. Rather than harassment or misdirection, his team struck with overwhelming force at carefully selected targets. When alien vehicles attempted to patrol the industrial district, they encountered improvised explosive devices that turned armored transports into twisted metal. When alien aerial drones swept the area, they found nothing. Volkov's teams had vanished into underground facilities that predated the Soviet Union. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The aliens had technology that could level mountains, but they couldn't protect themselves from enemies who struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. Their communications filled with reports of equipment failures, mysterious explosions, and the growing certainty that they were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't see. Sub-Commander Krex found himself facing a situation no hegemony training had prepared him for. His forces controlled territory in the traditional sense. They occupied strategic positions and could project force throughout the city. But control meant nothing when the enemy refused to present targets. His soldiers reported equipment malfunctions, communication failures, and the unsettling sensation of being watched by invisible eyes. "Admiral," Krex transmitted to the fleet, his professional composure beginning to crack, "we're encountering unexpected resistance patterns. The humans appear to be using asymmetric tactics that our doctrine doesn't address." Zephyros received similar reports from all 6 occupation zones. London reported equipment failures and communication disruptions. Moscow reported explosive attacks that appeared to come from empty terrain. Beijing, Tel Aviv, and Sydney echoed the same pattern: invisible enemies who struck without warning and vanished without trace. "Impossible," Zephyros muttered, reviewing the intelligence reports. Humans lack the technology for stealth warfare. Their military doctrine emphasizes direct confrontation. His intelligence was correct, as far as it went. Human military doctrine did emphasize direct confrontation when facing conventional enemies, but the Special Operations Forces now deployed on Earth represented 70 years of evolution beyond conventional warfare. They had learned to fight enemies who couldn't be defeated through superior firepower, against opponents who knew the terrain better than any satellite could map, in situations where victory meant survival rather than territory. The aliens were about to discover that humanity's greatest military innovation wasn't technological, it was tactical, and those tactics had been refined in conflicts that made their previous conquests look like training exercises. By the third day, Morrison's SEAL teams had established complete operational superiority in New York's underground. The aliens controlled the surface, but the surface was irrelevant when the real battle was happening in dimensions they couldn't perceive. Chen's Romeo team had captured an alien communications hub by accessing it through century-old steam tunnels. Rodriguez's Delta team had established sniper positions in buildings the aliens had declared secure. Morrison himself had penetrated the aliens' Central Park command post by walking through maintenance tunnels that connected to the park's original infrastructure. The psychological pressure was deliberate and overwhelming. Alien soldiers reported equipment that moved when no one was watching, weapons that disappeared from secured areas, communications that carried whispered messages in human languages. None of it was supernatural. All of it was special operations doctrine applied with surgical precision. Admiral Crex's latest transmission carried unmistakable strain. "My forces are reporting systematic equipment failure and possible stealth attacks. Request immediate reinforcement and advanced detection equipment." Zephyros studied the tactical displays with growing unease. His ground forces were experiencing casualty rates that made no sense given the technological disparity. Humans were supposed to be primitive. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles that couldn't penetrate hegemony armor. Their tactics were direct confrontation that hegemony doctrine could counter effortlessly. Yet somehow, his forces were losing effectiveness at a rate that suggested they were facing a peer-level adversary. "Deploy enhanced sensor packages," Zephyros ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. If the humans have stealth technology, we'll find it." His sensors found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Morrison's teams used no technology more advanced than suppressed firearms, electronic jammers, and detailed knowledge of urban infrastructure. Their stealth came from understanding terrain the aliens couldn't imagine and tactics the aliens had never encountered. In London, Stevens escalated to Phase 3 of Phantom Protocol, psychological warfare designed to convince the enemy that their own equipment was unreliable. Walsh's position in the sewers allowed him to access building foundations throughout the government district. Foster's sniper skills included electronic warfare training that turned alien communication equipment into psychological weapons. When alien soldiers tried to communicate, their radios carried sounds that seemed almost like human voices whispering just below the threshold of comprehension. When they attempted to use their targeting systems, the displays occasionally showed movement in empty spaces. When they tried to sleep, their environmental suits detected temperature changes and air movements that suggested invisible presences. None of it was real. All of it was terrifying. "Ghost Team reports complete psychological penetration," Stevens transmitted to Morrison. "Enemy forces are displaying classic stress indicators. Recommend escalation to Phase 4. Morrison checked his operational chronometer. 72 hours since the invasion began, and the aliens had achieved none of their tactical objectives. They controlled territory that was militarily irrelevant and faced an enemy that existed primarily in their own minds. Perfect conditions for the final phase of psychological warfare. "All teams, commence Phase 4, Morrison transmitted. "Authorization Tango 77 Alpha confirmed. Let's show them what humans learned in our wars." Volkov's Spetsnaz teams in Moscow had spent 3 days establishing what military theorists called operational dominance, the ability to control the pace and location of engagement, regardless of the enemy's technological advantages. His forces had turned the city's industrial district into a maze of improvised defensive positions, hidden supply caches, and kill zones that channeled alien movement into predetermined areas. When the aliens attempted to establish a permanent base in the Luzhniki district, they discovered that humans had learned to weaponize their own environment. Buildings became sniper nests, sewers became transportation networks, power lines became communication systems. The aliens found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the city itself. Frost team reports successful infrastructure denial, Volkov transmitted. Enemy forces are contained to 12 city blocks and experiencing supply difficulties. Recommend Phase 4 escalation. Morrison authorized the escalation with the cold satisfaction of a professional who had spent his career perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. Phase 4 represented the culmination of everything Special Operations Forces had learned during 70 years of unconventional conflicts. It was time to demonstrate why humanity's military doctrine had evolved beyond direct confrontation. In Beijing, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez had spent 3 days establishing what Delta Force called population integration warfare, using the city's massive civilian population as both intelligence network and operational camouflage. Her teams moved through crowds of people who looked exactly like them, communicated through networks that predated electronic surveillance, and struck from positions that were invisible precisely because they were obvious. The aliens couldn't distinguish between civilians and combatants because the distinction was tactically irrelevant. Every person in Beijing was part of a resistance network that provided intelligence, supplies, and operational support. The aliens found themselves occupying a city whose population was actively hostile but completely invisible. Dragon Team reports complete population integration, Rodriguez transmitted. Enemy forces are isolated and experiencing comprehensive intelligence failure. Phase 4 authorization confirmed. In Tel Aviv, Colonel David Cohen's commandos had turned the city into a demonstration of why Israel had developed some of the world's most effective counterterrorism techniques. His teams used the city's complex urban environment to create what military theorists called omnidirectional threat assessment conditions, where the enemy faced potential attack from every direction simultaneously. The aliens controlled strategic positions that were tactically meaningless because Cohen's teams could strike from positions that didn't appear on any map. Ancient tunnels, modern infrastructure, and improvised connections created a three-dimensional battlefield where traditional military doctrine became irrelevant. Sabra team reports complete environmental integration, Cohen transmitted. Enemy forces are experiencing tactical disorientation. Recommend immediate Phase 4 escalation. Morrison coordinated the global escalation with the precision that had made Navy SEALs legendary among special operations forces worldwide. Every team in every city would demonstrate simultaneously why humanity had evolved beyond conventional warfare. The aliens wanted to see Earth's military capabilities. They were about to witness the culmination of 10,000 years of human conflict evolution. All teams execute Phase 4 simultaneously, Morrison transmitted. Show them what we learned from our wars. The escalation began at exactly 15:30 GMT, synchronized across all 6 cities. In New York, Morrison's teams emerged from concealment-carrying weapons that officially didn't exist, compact nuclear devices designed for special operations use. In London, Stevens' teams activated electronic warfare equipment that turned the aliens' own technology into weapons against them. In Moscow, Volkov's teams demonstrated why Spetsnaz doctrine emphasized overwhelming psychological pressure. The nuclear device in Central Park was small by strategic standards, 5 kilotons, roughly one-third the yield of the Hiroshima bomb, but its placement was surgically precise, positioned beneath the alien command structure through tunnels that predated the city's modern infrastructure. When it detonated, it didn't just destroy the alien forces, It sent a message that reverberated through every hegemony communication channel. These primitive humans possessed weapons that could create miniature suns, and they were willing to use them in their own cities. Subcommander Krex's final transmission lasted exactly 3 seconds. Nuclear detonation confirmed. Command structure destroyed. Requesting immediate. The transmission ended in static and superheated plasma. Admiral Zephyros watched the tactical display with growing horror as the humans' capabilities became clear. The nuclear explosion in New York was followed by coordinated attacks across all 6 cities. In London, alien communication networks began transmitting human propaganda directly into hegemony channels. In Moscow, alien vehicles exploded in sequence as hidden charges detonated with perfect timing. In Beijing, alien forces reported being surrounded by human armies that appeared to materialize from empty air. Admiral, his communications officer announced with barely controlled panic, "We're receiving a transmission from the human leadership." General Hayes appeared on the main display, broadcasting from the Pentagon's war room. Behind her stood representatives from Special Operations Forces whose existence was supposedly classified. Navy SEALs, SAS, Spetsnaz, Delta Force, and dozens of other units that had spent 70 years learning to make the impossible routine. "Admiral Zephyros," Hayes began with the calm authority of a career soldier, "you wanted to see our military capabilities. What you've witnessed is approximately 1% of our operational capacity, executed by fewer than 10,000 personnel. You have 24 hours to withdraw all forces from Earth space or face annihilation protocols." Hayes gestured to the officers behind her, each representing military units that had perfected warfare techniques the hegemony had never encountered. "You've seen what our special operations forces can accomplish. You haven't seen our main military. You've experienced our harassment capabilities. You haven't experienced our strategic weapons. You've encountered our defensive measures. You haven't encountered our offensive capacity." The display shifted to show footage that made Zephyros's blood turn cold. Human special operations teams carrying portable nuclear weapons, captured alien technology being reverse-engineered in real time, and most terrifying of all, missile silos opening across Earth's surface to reveal weapons that could reach interplanetary distances. Earth maintains over 13,000 nuclear warheads. Hayes continued with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reading a grocery list. "Our special operations forces have demonstrated that we can deliver these weapons using your own technology. Our conventional forces haven't yet been deployed because they weren't necessary." Zephyr realized with sick certainty that he was facing something unprecedented in hegemony history, a species that had evolved beyond the need for technological superiority. These humans had developed warfare techniques that rendered traditional military doctrine obsolete. They had turned entire cities into weapons, made their own population into intelligence networks, and demonstrated the willingness to use strategic weapons in defensive scenarios. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "we're receiving similar transmissions from human forces in all 6 cities. They're broadcasting using our own equipment." Morrison's voice came through the speakers with the calm professionalism of someone who had just completed a routine training exercise. "Tell your people about the humans." Stephen's transmission from London carried the dry humor that had made SAS legendary. "Tell them what happens when you corner a species that learned to hunt in the dark." Volkov's message from Moscow reflected the brutal efficiency of Spetsnaz doctrine. "Tell them why you ran." Rodriguez's transmission from Beijing demonstrated the precision that had made Delta Force feared worldwide. "Tell them about the species that turned their own cities into weapons." Cohen's final message from Tel Aviv carried the weight of a people who had learned that survival meant fighting wars the enemy couldn't win. "Tell them about the species that doesn't surrender." Zephyros faced the impossible choice that no hegemony commander had ever confronted: retreat or extinction. His ground forces were combat ineffective, his supply lines were compromised, and his troops were psychologically broken. Worse, He realized that the humans had never deployed their main military forces. No tanks, no aircraft carriers, no strategic bombers. They had accomplished this using special operations forces that represented a tiny fraction of their total military capacity. "Admiral," his operations officer reported with barely controlled terror, "our ground forces are requesting immediate evacuation. They're reporting, sir, they're reporting that they can hear humans laughing in the walls." Zephyros understood that psychological warfare had achieved what technological superiority couldn't. His forces were no longer soldiers, but prey animals fleeing predators they couldn't see. The humans had demonstrated something the hegemony had never encountered, a species that had evolved warfare itself as their primary evolutionary advantage. "Signal the fleet," Zephyros commanded with the bitter taste of unprecedented defeat. "Prepare for emergency withdrawal. All ground forces, immediate evacuation to nearest landing zones." As the hegemony fleet began its humiliating retreat, Morrison stood on a New York rooftop watching alien ships flee Earth's atmosphere. In his hand, he held a captured alien communication device displaying a message he was transmitting to every hegemony vessel. "Earth remembers." The message was simple, but its implications were terrifying. These humans didn't just win wars, they remembered them. They learned from them. They evolved because of them. And they had just demonstrated that 70 years of preparing for this exact scenario had created military capabilities that transcended conventional warfare entirely. Stevens broadcast from London using alien equipment. "Tell your people about the humans. Tell them what happens when you threaten a species that spent 10,000 years learning to kill its own kind." Volkov's transmission from Moscow carried the weight of strategic truth. "Tell them why you ran. Tell them about the species that makes its enemies afraid to sleep." Rodriguez's message from Beijing demonstrated why Special Operations Forces were humanity's greatest military achievement. "Tell them about the species that turned warfare into art." Cohen's final transmission from Tel Aviv reflected the lesson that would echo through hegemony space for generations. "Tell them about the species that doesn't just fight wars, it perfects them." General Hayes delivered the final message from the Pentagon, speaking directly to Admiral Zephyros as his fleet fled beyond Earth's orbital space. "Admiral, you wanted to see our military capabilities. What you witnessed was our specialty forces conducting a defensive exercise. Our main military remains uncommitted. Our strategic weapons remain unused. Our operational capacity remains untested." She paused, allowing the implications to settle. "Next species that threatens Earth will face not just our special operations forces, but everything we've learned from 10,000 years of warfare. We suggest you inform your government that humanity prefers diplomacy, but we've spent our entire evolutionary history preparing for war." The transmission ended, leaving Zephyros alone with the knowledge that his species had encountered something unprecedented, a civilization that had evolved warfare itself as its primary survival mechanism. These humans didn't just possess weapons. They were weapons, refined through millennia of conflict into something that could turn any environment into a battlefield and any population into an army. As the stellar dominion crossed beyond Earth's solar system, Zephyros composed his report to the hegemony high command with the grim certainty that this defeat would reshape military doctrine throughout their space. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption about technological superiority in conventional warfare. His final entry read, "Recommendation: classify humanity as level Omega threat. Do not engage under any circumstances. Species demonstrates tactical evolution beyond current military theory. They have weaponized their own civilization." On Earth, Morrison and his fellow Special Operations commanders received new orders from General Hayes. "Prepare contingency plans for the inevitable moment when the rest of the galaxy would come to investigate why the hegemony of 7 suns had fled screaming from a single planet." The humans had won their first interstellar war using nothing but the skills they had learned fighting each other. Now they would have time to prepare for the next one, with alien technology to reverse engineer, and the knowledge that they had just announced humanity's arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. The species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare had finally found enemies worthy of their skills. And those enemies had just learned why evolution had created apex predators who were smart enough to make their prey afraid of the dark.